Good evening. Thank you for coming. As you just heard, I'm a retired Spanish professor. For 37 years, I taught Spanish language and literature at Pomona College in Claremont. What I found most appealing about Spanish culture was its hybrid nature. When I first went to Spain in 1965, the ship on which I was traveling docked for a day in Casablanca, Morocco, before arriving at Algeciras on Spain's southern coast. Standing on the beach in Algeciras, one could gaze across the Straits of Gibraltar and see Morocco, only 9 miles away. As I wandered through the narrow streets of Algeciras, I was struck by the fact that most of the architecture I saw was identical to what I had just seen in Morocco. The people, too, were indistinguishable from Moroccans. Alexandre Dumas famously wrote that, quote, Africa begins at the Pyrenees, but what he and other 19th-century European and American travelers found so exotic about Spain might better have been termed oriental or even Semitic. What they were referring to was the indelible imprint left on Spain by the 700 years during which Muslims, Jews, and Christians coexisted there. After the Muslims conquered the Iberian Peninsula in the year 711, they collaborated with the native Jewish and Christian populations to create what by the 9th century and for 400 years after that was the most advanced civilization in Europe. As Maria Rosa Menocal has written in her book, The Ornament of the World, how Muslims, Jews, and Christians created a culture of tolerance in medieval Spain, quote, Jews, Christians, and Muslims lived side by side, and despite their intractable differences and enduring hostilities, nourished a complex culture of tolerance. This only sometimes included guarantees of religious freedoms comparable to those we would expect in a modern, quote, tolerant state. Rather, it found expression in the often unconscious acceptance that contradictions within oneself as within one's own culture could be positive and productive. It was there that the profoundly Arabized Jews rediscovered and reinvented Hebrew. There that Christians embraced nearly every aspect of Arabic style, from the intellectual style of philosophy to the architectural styles of mosques, not only while living in Islamic domains, but especially after wresting political control from them. There that men of unshakable faith, like Abelard and Maimonides and Averroes, saw no contradiction in pursuing truth, whether philosophical or scientific or religious, across confessional lines. This vision of a culture of tolerance recognized that incongruity in the shaping of individuals as well as their cultures was enriching and productive. It was an approach to life and its artistic and intellectual and even religious pursuits that was contested by many, as it is today, and violently so at times, as it is today, and yet powerful and shaping, nevertheless, for hundreds of years. That culture of tolerance came to an end in 1492, when Ferdinand and Isabella conquered Granada, the last remaining Muslim stronghold in Spain, and expelled the Jews. Deprived of the skills of its Muslim and Jewish inhabitants, and lacking the stimulus and cross-fertilization provided by interaction with people of different backgrounds and viewpoints, Spain soon became a cultural backwater, an impoverished bastion of ignorance and bigotry. When the Jews were thrown out of Spain, the only place that welcomed them was the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Sultan, Bayezid II, sent his navy to rescue Muslims and Jews who were fleeing Spain, and he sent out proclamations throughout his empire that the refugees were to be welcomed. He threatened with death all those who treated the Jews harshly or refused them admission into his empire. According to legend, he ridiculed the conduct of Ferdinand and Isabella. Quote, "You venture to call Ferdinand a wise ruler," he said to his courtiers, "he who has impoverished his own country and enriched mine." The Jews reciprocated the Ottomans' generosity by introducing new ideas, methods, and craftsmanship. The first printing press in Constantinople was established by Sephardic Jews in 1493. During the 16th century, the Ottoman Jewish communities emerged as the foremost centers of Jewish learning in the world. It is no accident that it was during the same period, in the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent, that the Ottoman Empire attained the zenith of its power. Under Ottoman rule, Salonika became the only city in the world with a Jewish majority. Ladino, the vernacular of the Sephardic Jews, was the most commonly spoken language, and the city virtually shut down on the Sabbath and Jewish holidays. This continued until the Greeks conquered Salonika during the Balkan War in 1913. So, for over 1,000 years, first in Spain and then in the Ottoman Empire, Jews lived in safety, often in comfort and prosperity, and practiced their religion freely under Muslim rule. Yes, there were isolated incidents when Jews were mistreated, but in that millennium of coexistence, there was nothing even remotely approaching the violent persecution and hatred that Jews experienced in every Christian country in Europe where they lived. Considering that history, I find it profoundly shocking that so many people nowadays consider the current enmity between Jews and Muslims normal or to be expected. In fact, the rift between the two great Abrahamic religions has occurred during my lifetime and was caused mainly by the founding of the State of Israel and the rise of Arab nationalism. Apparently, both Jews and Muslims have a very short memory. If we would take the time to study each other's religion and culture, and even more importantly, to get personally acquainted with people of the other religion, we would quickly become aware that the things we have in common far outweigh those that separate us. In America, both Jews and Muslims have a higher than average proportion of college graduates and tend to be relatively affluent. Most of us live in mixed ethnic and religious neighborhoods and send our children to public schools. Jews and Muslims are especially prominent in the fields of engineering, computer science, and medicine, often working side by side in the same offices. Members of both groups are more likely to be politically liberal. A Gallup poll released last summer showed that 78% of Muslims and 61% of Jews have remained among the most ardent supporters of President Obama during a time when his overall job approval ratings have fallen sharply. Both Judaism and Islam are very old religions with centuries of tradition behind them. Both are struggling to maintain their core beliefs and practices while adapting to the conditions of life in 21st century America. The two religions have similar dietary laws, and many Muslims purchase kosher food because it is harder to find halal-certified products. Both Jews and Muslims worry that their children or grandchildren will lose their ethnic and/or religious identity through assimilation and intermarriage. Last year, the similarities between Islam and Judaism were particularly evident because the Jewish penitential month of Elul coincided exactly with Ramadan, according to the lunar calendar that both religions share. When the month ended, the Jews flocked to synagogues to celebrate Rosh Hashanah, while the Muslims were attending Eid al-Fitr services in mosques. There are also significant differences between the two communities. It is estimated that at least 2/3 of American Muslims are foreign-born immigrants, while a large majority of American Jews today are third- or fourth-generation Americans. Muslims have come to the United States from about 80 different countries, and their country of origin continues to play an important part in their social lives and religious practice. Such differences among Jews have largely been smoothed out over time as the community has become more Americanized. For most American Jews, the practice of their religion has gradually undergone drastic changes as it has come to reflect the influence of mainstream American Protestantism. From our Protestant neighbors, we have borrowed such innovations as men's clubs, sisterhoods, youth groups, and adult education classes. Many congregations now use as much English as Hebrew in their services. We have incorporated responsive readings and congregational singing, and the sermon has come to hold a central place in our worship. Just as most American Christians attend church only sporadically during most of the year, but fill the pews on Christmas and Easter, Jews also neglect weekly Sabbath services, but pack the synagogues on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And Hanukkah, which is traditionally a minor holiday, has taken on much greater importance due to its proximity to Christmas. The most recent innovation in American Judaism has been the acceptance of female rabbis, which not so long ago would have been unthinkable. No such accommodations to American customs have yet occurred in Islam, but I would venture to guess that it is only a matter of time. As Imam Faisal Abdul Rauf has written in his book, What's Right About Islam, A New Vision for Muslims in the West, quote, "The crucial need of our day is to find ways to accelerate the process whereby American Muslims will be able to establish their Islamic identity not apart from or in spite of their American identity, but precisely in and through it." Ralph argues that American Jews are especially well qualified to help their Muslim neighbors accomplish this because we have so recently gone through the same process ourselves and have been very successful in adapting to life in America's pluralistic society. The Torah commands us Jews to love the stranger as ourselves, for we were strangers in the land of Egypt. Perhaps we should update that verse to mandate that we love the immigrant as ourselves, for we too were immigrants not so long ago. In a very beautiful verse in the Quran, God tells humankind, quote, "We have created you male and female and made you into nations and tribes that you might get to know one another." This verse puts a positive spin on gender and ethnic differences, which are usually seen as problematic. Just as the differences between men and women make each sex interesting and attractive to the other, our ethnic, cultural, and religious differences should stimulate our curiosity and make us want to learn from each other. Every person, every culture, every religion possesses part of the truth. None of them has it all. When two ideas conflict, it doesn't necessarily mean that one is true and the other false. They may just represent two different perspectives on reality. The most important task facing Jews and Muslims today is healing the hurts we have caused each other and rediscovering our kinship. I can think of no place better suited to accomplishing those things than here in California. California is both the most populous state in the nation and the first state to have no ethnic majority. More than a quarter of the state's population is foreign-born, a higher proportion than in any other state. Nearly 43% of California residents speak a language other than English at home, a proportion far higher than any other state. Approximately one-third of Californians self-identify as Roman Catholic, the largest number of any state, and California also has the largest Mormon population of any state outside Utah, outnumbering all other non-Catholic Christian denominations. 40% of all Buddhists in the United States live in Southern California. California has the largest Muslim population and the second largest Jewish population of any state. Yet, both Jews and Muslims are very small minorities. Combined, they constitute no more than 5% of the population. In these difficult economic times, both groups are especially vulnerable to bigotry, extremism, and scapegoating, and both are targeted for proselytism by evangelical Christians. A Gallup poll released in January of last year found that only 14% of Americans viewed Islam either, quote, somewhat favorably or very favorably, while 71% had a favorable view of Judaism. Nevertheless, fully 25% admitted that their view of Judaism was either somewhat unfavorable or not favorable at all, and the most recent FBI statistics indicate that 68.5% of all verified hate crimes motivated by religious bias were anti-Jewish. The Gallup poll also revealed that the strongest predictor of prejudice against Muslims is whether a person holds similar feelings about Jews. Depending on whose statistics you accept, the Jewish population in the United States is either remaining stable or shrinking. The Muslim population, on the other hand, is growing rapidly and is expected to double within the next 2 decades. As time goes by, we Jews are going to need to rely increasingly on our Muslim brothers and sisters for help and support in defending ourselves against the bigots who would destroy both of our communities. Some Jews insist that there is no point in trying to work with Muslims so long as they are unwilling to accept Israel's right to exist. However, as Jeremiah Haber has pointed out, quote, to demand or even wish of the other side to accept your narrative, especially when that narrative is highly controversial and detrimental to the other side, and to make that wish a precondition for acceptance is to place us back in the Middle Ages. If Jews can respect and tolerate Christians, and liberals can respect and tolerate conservatives, then Zionists should be able to respect and tolerate anti-Zionists, especially Muslim and Arab anti-Zionists. Not necessarily to agree with them, of course, but to respect and tolerate them, and in any event, it is the duty of religious leaders not to make the existence of those differences a barrier to further cooperation and search for understanding against the orthodox bigots of the world, both religious and secular. By the same token, Muslims need to learn to broach these issues with Jews in ways that make genuine dialogue possible. In his excellent book, You Don't Have to Be Wrong for Me to Be Right, Finding Faith Without Fanaticism, Rabbi Brad Hirschfield describes a conversation he had with Imam Muhammad Ali al-Elahi. Elahi became strident and launched into a stream of invective about how the real terrorist in the Middle East is Israel, that Israel is an artificial nation mercilessly imposed on the entire Muslim community, and that Zionism itself is a perversion of the shared values of humanity, including what he called the best values found within Jewish tradition. I finally had to stop him. I don't think anything you've said is true, I said, but I still want to take you seriously because I know that your views are held sincerely and that your desire is not to hurt me, correct? Of course, he replied, calming down a bit, but I'm right. Let us assume you are right, I said. I can't hear you when you talk to me that way, and neither can anyone else in my community that doesn't already agree with you. For your own sake, for the purpose of being more effective at getting your own message out, can you find a way to make your case so that it doesn't make me feel completely wrong as soon as you open your mouth? Because if you can do that, I'll hear you better and listen more closely to what you were saying. I would like to conclude by mentioning a few events of the past year that I think augur well for the future of Muslim-Jewish relations in Southern California. Early last year, while the debate was over the construction of the so-called Ground Zero Mosque was raging in the national media, the Islamic Center in the sleepy little town of Temecula in southwest Riverside County announced plans to build a two-story, 25,000-square-foot mosque and community center on 4 acres of rural land which the congregation had purchased 10 years before. Having expanded from a nucleus of 7 families to 150 members, they had outgrown the warehouse in an industrial building that they had been sharing with the TST Molding Company for 7 years. Since their property was adjacent to the Calvary Baptist Church, they felt confident that they would have no trouble getting their plans approved by the city. They certainly had no idea that their little congregation would soon be getting mentioned regularly on national news broadcasts. As soon as word began to circulate about plans for the mosque, some local people organized to prevent it from happening. Calling themselves Concerned American Citizens, the group included an Iranian immigrant who had converted from Islam, some Tea Party activists, and members of a local Republican women's club. They gathered hundreds of signatures on petitions and bombarded members of the Planning Commission and the City Council with angry emails. One of the earliest opponents was Bill Wrench, pastor of the Baptist Church, who said that Islam was a false religion and that, quote, Christianity and Islam mix like oil and water. He claimed that he acknowledged the Muslim group's right to build a mosque. He just didn't want it in his neighborhood. On July 30th, about 20 people gathered across the street from the Islamic Center, carrying signs reading, quote, mosques are monuments to terrorism, and, quote, Muslims danced for joy on 9/11. They screamed insults into bullhorns, disrupting the Friday prayer services underway in the mosque and frightening the children inside. Some of them had brought their dogs with them since they had heard that Muslims found dogs offensive. Imam Mahmoud Harmouche later told a reporter, "We don't hate dogs," adding that he grew up with 2 Doberman pinschers on a farm in Syria, not far from Aleppo. "We just don't allow them in the house." Temple Beth Sholem of the Menifee Valley invited Imam Harmouche to speak on September 4th at their Slichot service, a penitential service held on the Saturday evening before Rosh Hashanah. About a dozen members of the Concerned American Citizens rudely disrupted that service as well, interrupting and contradicting the imam while he tried to speak. Meanwhile, the Islamic Center spent $17,000 to satisfy all the city's requirements: traffic studies, environmental impact reports, even a preliminary survey for endangered burrowing owls. The city's Planning and Redevelopment Department therefore recommended approval of the project. A hearing before the City Council was scheduled for December the 1st. Even though that was the first night of Hanukkah, Eric Green, Southern California Regional Director of the Progressive Jewish Alliance, and 8 other members of the group drove from Los Angeles to Temecula to speak in support of the proposed center and of religious pluralism. More than 200 people packed Temecula's City Hall that night. The City Council unanimously approved construction of the mosque, but the concerned American citizens appealed the decision, and another hearing was scheduled for January 25th. The mayor of Temecula, Jeff Comerchero, a Sephardic Jew from Brooklyn and a lifelong Republican, said he had received an email asking him what he would say to his children and grandchildren if he voted against the appeal. He replied, "I am proud to sit up here and uphold the Constitution. That's what I took my oath of office to do." More than 100 people signed up to speak at the meeting to consider the appeal, which began at 7 p.m. and lasted a record-breaking 8.5 hours. Finally, at about 3:30 in the morning on January 26th, the City Council approved construction of the mosque. Hadi Nael, president of the Islamic Center's Board of Directors, commented, quote, "This is really huge. It will set the tone for the country, that Temecula took a tough stand. With all that opposition, they approved it based on the merit of land use. So that will be the standard that other cities hopefully will follow." Last June, the Claremont School of Theology, a seminary affiliated with the United Methodist Church, announced that in autumn 2010, it would begin training future rabbis and imams, as well as Protestant ministers, thus becoming the first accredited institution in the United States to provide education for clergy of all 3 Abrahamic faiths. The seminary offers master's and doctoral degrees. Dr. Jerry Campbell, president of the seminary, explained that, quote, "Christian ministers, Jewish rabbis, and Muslim imams, and eventually clerics from other religions will be educated side by side, each in their own traditions, but also with classes in common, so they learn to work together to address the problems that face humanity today and can only be solved if religions work together across boundaries. The Islamic Center of Southern California will be in charge of the Muslim curriculum, and the Academy for Jewish Religion, a non-denominational rabbinical school, will administer the Jewish portions." Previously, the only accredited institution in the United States offering training for imams was the non-denominational Hartford Seminary's Islamic chaplaincy program, intended to prepare students to serve as Muslim chaplains in the armed forces. Rabbi Dr. Mel Gottlieb, president and dean of the California branch of the Academy for Jewish Religion, argued that, quote, "The world suffers from our lack of knowledge of each other and from the traditions that rule us. We must look ourselves in the mirror and begin to think much larger thoughts of love rather than remain crippled by our fears." Not surprisingly, the unconventional interfaith program aroused some opposition, both from Christians and Jews. One faculty member of the Academy for Jewish Religion took a leave of absence to protest the Academy's participation. When officials of the United Methodist Church first learned of the plan, they worried that the seminary was abandoning its core mission to train ministers for the church, and they suspended the seminary's funding pending an investigation. The seminary administration eventually succeeded in reassuring the church that students would continue to receive a rigorous education in their own religious traditions. Dr. Campbell stated that, quote, "If you come here as a United Methodist, my hope is that you leave here as a much wiser United Methodist." Najiba Saeed Miller, the seminary's first Muslim faculty member, said that, quote, "Our goal is not to dilute our faith, but rather to be better Muslims, Jews, Catholics, Hindus, Protestants, Buddhists, and by being so, together we will tear down walls of hate that seek to separate us." On June 29th, the church's university senate voted to restore the funding and lift the other sanctions it had imposed on the school. Muslim reactions to the new program have generally been positive. Imam Mohammed Magid, vice president of the Islamic Society of North America, said that Muslims have long dreamed of having an American imam training program. Not only has the supply chain for imams in the U.S. suffered since 9/11, largely due to immigration and visa issues, but also, he points out, quote, "In order for second-generation Muslims to have Islam be relevant to their life, they have to have an imam who understands American culture." Dr. Muzammil Siddiqui, imam of the Islamic Society of Orange County, enthusiastically endorsed the new program, pointing out that the Muslim community is growing and many people are realizing that we need to have locally trained, homegrown imams. Dr. Siddiqui also serves as president of the Fiqh Council of North America, an association of 18 Muslim legal scholars that interprets Islamic law to sustain Islamic jurisprudence and serves as an advisory role for Muslim Americans. He is noted for having issued a fatwa in 2005 condemning suicide bombing. This past August, Dr. Siddiqui joined 7 other American Muslim leaders on a study tour to Dachau and Auschwitz that was co-sponsored by the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, a think tank affiliated with Germany's Christian Democratic Union, and the Center for Interreligious Understanding, a New Jersey-based interfaith dialogue group. During an audience with the Archbishop of Krakow, Siddiqui said, quote, "We came here to understand the pain of the Jewish community. This is in order to improve relationships, because you cannot build relationships with people unless you know what they've been through." In addition to the encouraging events I have just described, there are a number of ongoing programs here in Southern California that promote dialogue between Muslims and Jews. The Daniel Pearl Foundation, founded in 2003 in memory of murdered Jewish journalist Daniel Pearl by his parents, Ruth and Judea Pearl, sponsors such programs as the Daniel Pearl Journalism Fellowship, which brings promising mid-career foreign journalists to work for 6 months in a U.S. newsroom. Nasri Esmat, an Egyptian journalist who was in Los Angeles as a Daniel Pearl Fellow in 2010, has submitted reports on the recent uprising against Mubarak to the Los Angeles Jewish Journal. Another of the Foundation's programs is the annual Daniel Pearl Memorial Lecture at UCLA. This year's lecture, entitled Peace Process or War Process, The Defeat of Reason in the Middle East, was given by Leon Wieseltier, the literary editor of the New Republic magazine, on February 10th. Founded in 2007, New Ground, a joint partnership between the Muslim Public Affairs Council and the Progressive Jewish Alliance, is an innovative fellowship program dedicated to building meaningful relationships and fostering a strong sense of civic engagement amongst diverse groups of young Muslim and Jewish professionals in Los Angeles. New Ground provides opportunities for Muslims and Jews of all backgrounds to build honest, authentic relationships with one another, to establish a common commitment to change, and to become a new cadre of leaders who inspire hope in a troubled world. On May 6, 2010, New Ground was honored with the Interfaith Leadership Award at the Valley Interfaith Council's annual awards dinner. In June, Aziza Hassan, co-director of New Ground, delivered the commencement address at her alma mater, Bethel College, a private college in Kansas affiliated with the Mennonite Church. Hassan is an interfaith communicator who, quote, exemplifies in her life and profession Bethel's core values, said interim president John Sheriff in his introduction. She is a graduate of whom Bethel is very proud. New Ground also sponsors an annual Muslim-Jewish film series at the University of Southern California. The Center for Muslim-Jewish Engagement, established in 2008, is a collaboration of the Omar Ibn al-Khattab Foundation, Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, and the University of Southern California's Center for Religion and Civic Culture. The center provides resources, experience, and expertise to enhance the understanding of Muslims and Jews about each other's faiths, as well as to increase their ability to engage with each other on issues of mutual importance. During February and March of this year, the center is presenting a series of lectures on understanding Islam by Rabbi Reuben Firestone, Dr. Amir Hussein, and Dr. Mehnaz Afridi at Congregation Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades. And finally, the Pacifica Institute, where we are gathered this evening, regularly organizes goodwill trips to Turkey for interfaith groups of clergy, academics, and government officials. The Institute also hosts iftar dinners during Ramadan, including one that brought together local Muslims and members of the University Synagogue this past fall, as well as annual friendship and dialogue dinners and lectures like this one. In the past few years, we have made considerable progress in overcoming the barriers of hatred and fear that have separated Muslims and Jews. Much remains to be done. We here in Southern California are not going to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but if we can continue to work together cooperatively on local issues, we can demonstrate to our co-religionists elsewhere that it is still possible for these two ancient religions to overcome their differences and live together in peace and harmony. This is vitally important for both groups, but especially for Muslims. As Imam Faisal Rauf has written, quote, American Muslims, positioned as they are, with a foot in both East and West, have a vital contribution to make. They are in a position to say, not only that no contradiction exists between Islam's theology and the longing of many Muslims for democratic values and equality of opportunity, but also that Islam's theology and jurisprudence demand it. Because they understand the aspirations of each side and have reconciled their American and Islamic identities, they have a central mediating role to play in building trust and brokering interreligious and intercultural communication between America and the Muslim world. By forging alliances and coalitions with other American religious groups, particularly major Jewish and Christian institutions, American Muslims can assist in crafting the best language, innovative approaches, and perhaps most important, the right working perspectives with which our nation could help the Muslim world solve its problems. In so doing, American Muslims meet their obligation to play a critically important role as mediators between the 1.2 billion Muslims worldwide and their great nation. And I think we can all agree that that is a goal worth striving for. Thank you.